Hi everyone, I'm Olivia and I'm CBS Marketing and Fundraising Coordinator. Today is International Women's Day and I'm here with our two placement students, Lucy and Adela, as well as Rachel and Mel, who are part of the Athena Network and both run their own businesses.
Good morning, everybody. Happy International Women's Day. I'm Rachel Maunder and I work with business professionals on finding and crafting their story for speaking. So I do that both individually with individual coaching, but I also do training for organisations, whether that's a charity or a corporate. That's who I am and what I do.
Good morning from what is normally sunny Durban, South Africa, a little bit rainy and miserable today. But I'm Mel Gard and I own a digital marketing agency, WSI. We focus on Google Ads, search engine optimization, and content marketing.
The theme of this year's International Women's Day is Break the Bias, which is all about challenging the gender bias, discrimination, and stereotyping that women face. Whether deliberate or unconscious, bias makes it difficult for women to move ahead. Knowing that bias exists isn't enough. Action is needed to level the playing field, and we're here to discuss just that today. So my first question to the group is, what challenges do you face as a woman, both personally and professionally? Does anyone want to start?
I'll jump in. I'm honestly not sure that I face too many challenges because I'm a woman in business. If I have, it will have been sort of more retrospective, and I think this is where my vintage gives me a bit of clout now, that I think there were times when I perhaps was dismissed a little bit by a predominantly male environment. But to be honest, I've never worked in that kind of environment. It would only be at a meeting, perhaps, now that I'm self-employed, that there might be a majority, but it's not been a major thing. I do think personally, I'm a single woman now, and one of the transitions from being married to being single again that I hadn't anticipated would be a challenge was exactly that, of going into the exact same scenario where I might have gone before on my own, but suddenly feeling very uncomfortable, and I don't know whether it's my imagination, but I feel I'm treated differently. I think socially, single men are more embraced and included than single women. Don't know why that is, don't know if it's even true, but that's my perception of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think interestingly as well, I don't think I've necessarily faced any sort of like discrimination or microaggressions just for being a woman in a space, but mine's always been linked with my age as well. So I was brought onto a trustee board specifically as a young trustee because they were trying to bring younger voices in. But there was a few comments that were made, but one of them I remember sitting at the end of the table with the other young trustee, and someone sat next to me and said, I'm sat at the kids' table, or like it would be like little digs like that. And like that, it is, even though that's, I laughed that off. There were moments like that that then made me feel like my voice wasn't as valid in that room because I was a lot younger than the other people on that board. But in fact, that's the whole reason why I was brought in. So for me, it's always been linked with being a woman, but being a younger woman in a space with older people as well.
And I think that's right. And that kind of remark often isn't badly meant. It's meant as a joke, but actually it's not really, is it?
No, yeah, exactly, definitely.
That's it. It's all about it is about the microaggressions and the small behaviors that show inherent bias. I think, the number of times where I've received an email from sort of a male client where something that would take one line to somebody else all of a sudden becomes 4 lines because they feel like I need an explanation. And I do also think that it's, as female business owners, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies because I find a lot of the women that I've interacted with, they will refer to, I have a small business. Darling, you brave, you run your own business. If you are a woman standing on the side of the road selling, sort of corn that you've cooked over a fire. You're running your own business. Step into that and own it, as opposed to saying, oh, you know, it's always this, oh, I've got a small business that does this. It's huge. If it was a man talking about his business, it would be, I've got this, you know, amazing sort of outfit that does all of these incredible things. Never mind, it's him, you know, fiddling with woodworking tools in the garage. So I think that we sometimes tend to talk ourselves down, and we need to be able to step up into that and say, you know what, you don't need to, I don't refer to my business like that, so therefore you don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned emails as well there, Mel, which I think is interesting, because I see a lot on Facebook and other social media about the way women and men write emails differently. So like I check myself a lot more now, in that I'd always be like, I hope that makes sense. And like, you know, kind of being apologetic in the request that you're asking for, and like over explaining and that sort of thing. I think there's, if you put those emails sort of side by side, as coming from a male colleague and coming from a female colleague, yeah, there's definitely a big difference there.
Yeah, my husband calls me out on those. He calls it my people pleasing tendencies.
Yes.
And he says, you really didn't need to say that. So it's also good to have a champion in your corner, to be able to point out with kindness where you might be sabotaging yourself.
Yeah, most definitely.
Obviously now both of you run your own businesses and it's a slightly different playing field. But do you think before, when you were working, there were few things that you noticed that you think we need to work on as a society, as in terms of the gender pay gap, or in terms of the difference between privilege and working in a male-dominated industry?
Look,
Yeah, you go ahead now.
I'm going to jump straight in there, because, and I know that you know, the perspective that I'm coming from is owning a business in South Africa and I don't have an employed perspective. I've never been employed. Honestly, I've owned my own business since I was in my early 20s. So the perspective that I have is that in South Africa, very much so, there is still a discrimination against women of a certain age, because heaven forbid they fall pregnant. So there is this idea that, and it's so heavily promoted in our society, to treat women equally, and to, you know, our government trumpets the fact that we have one of the most progressive parliaments in the world as far as female representation goes. But there isn't any kind of employment protection for women with maternity leave, with there being that pay for companies to be able to have some kind of cushion, that if, you know, sort of critical staff do get pregnant, to be able to access some kind of fund for the company to be able to potentially bring somebody on a short-term hire to cushion that. Because we carry on saying to companies, you have to treat women equally. But then at the same time, we're saying to women, you can be everything. You can be a mom, you can have a career, you can do all of these amazing things, but we aren't facilitating companies to be able to let them live that life, because we're saying this is the things that you should have, but we aren't building the structural framework to be able to make it a reality. So, you know, for smaller companies, the impact of somebody being pregnant can be enormous. And I just think that we have to, in order to give especially younger women the best possible chance, we need to start having plans in place, some kind of financial assistance or insurance that you can have, that should somebody be out of commission for that period of time, that you can have the ability to be able to say, don't worry, you take your 6 months and you be a mom, and your job will be here when you get back, in the full confidence that you've got a way to be able to manage that.
And obviously I'm not speaking from like personal experience, because I don't have children, but I really hope to an extent that maybe the pandemic's helped with that, because I know obviously companies have had the experience of colleagues, both male and female, working from home. And I think a lot of companies have realized, oh wait, they can deliver exactly the same work to the same standard from home, whilst obviously still being able to maintain some of those childcare responsibilities to an extent. Obviously, you know, working from home is going to be challenging when you do have those responsibilities, but I hope that that's maybe made some companies be a bit more progressive in that area.
Oh, I really hope so. I mean, it's as an employer, it's always we've always had it that if somebody says my child is sick or something happens in the family, take the day. We figure it out later. That's where your prime responsibility lies. But unfortunately, you know that this is not the reality for most employees. And what concerns me is that it now becomes something like, sort of, oh, well, you can take your 2 months maternity leave and then you can just work remotely. So the expectation then becomes that you are more available, as opposed to the fact that, you know what, this is a really important time in your child's life and you should be able to take that time without feeling like you are putting anybody's profitability in jeopardy.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess building on that sort of idea of what progress is there still to be made, a question for Rachel, not to put you on the spot, but when we consider things like the gender pay gap amongst employees is still around, I think it's around 15%, or was in 2020. And I think a couple of years ago, a study showed that 17% of the UK's top 100 charities by income have female chairs. So obviously that's an incredibly small amount. What work do you think needs to be done, or what progress can we make in terms of like making young women and, well, all women feel like they can take up those positions as chairs of charities or as CEOs and that sort of thing?
So is your question around, sort of feeling empowered to do it because they're a woman, or because they might want time off for childcare?
I think feeling empowered to do it as a woman. So when when a woman sees that only 17% of the UK's top 100 charities have female chairs, how kind of overcoming that like imposter syndrome in a way, so they don't, like, you could look at that statistic and think, okay, well that's not a space for me then, because the majority of those chairs are men. So I guess it's kind of like, how do we encourage and pave a way for women to feel like they can hold those positions?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Liv, and I think it's a hard one to answer in one sense, because I don't know, I've never worked in that kind of sector. I wonder whether the women are even looking at themselves as part of a percentage. It's more of an individual thing of, have they got it within them to become a CEO? And I suspect that some young women do have the drive to do that, but I think it starts earlier, doesn't it? It would be not so much of, have I got the drive to become the CEO, because I'm imagine that once you get to senior management, the next step up isn't necessarily the challenge. It's at entry level into whatever organisation women are going that the problem lies. And there's lots of generalisations, and we've talked already about, women being self-effacing and apologising and all of that. And that translates into the workplace of not speaking out in meetings, not being listened to if they do speak out. Often just the physical thing that our voices tend to be, less well heard. If you've got a man with a loud voice, because their pitch is lower, they are heard more easily. And we are wired differently, and it's impossible to unpick to what extent that's nature or nurture. So I think the work has to start at that base, at that entry level, for that progression to the first leadership level, if you like, to make it possible for women, to allow them time to be heard, to have allies, male allies in the workplace that recognise, and for everybody to read books like Lean In, and, just to sort of realise, to find their own self-limitations, I think. As I say, we've already mentioned the limits we put on ourselves as women, and raising people's awareness of those limitations, changing those thought processes. So it's training and work on all of that, as well as the actual skills they need of handling challenging conversations, how to be heard in a meeting. So that training probably is there, but it's the underlying self-belief stuff that perhaps is overlooked by organisations.
Yeah, and it's that idea of having those role models as well. And obviously,
yeah,
like, you need women to get into those positions to be able to have those women to look up to. Like when you look at, we're very lucky to be a charity led by a black woman, and I would hope that means that young black women would look up to someone like Dorothy and think, well, if she can do it, so can I, especially looking at where she's come from with, growing up in Zimbabwe to a single mother with relatively low funds and that sort of thing. So it's about having those role models in those positions to aspire to be.
It is indeed, but one of the dangers of that is that some of the women who get to those higher positions, and this might not be quite the same in the charity sector as in the corporate, but not all women who rise to those higher positions are the kind of people that want to put a hand down to pull somebody else up. And that is the key to it, that women who do manage to find their way, for whatever reason, whether it's that they've always been brought up to believe they can achieve whatever they want, or whether it's just their own personality, it's that ability to think, I want to help others up behind me. And that comes down to that argument of not trying to be like the men in those leadership roles, but embracing your feminine style of leadership. And I say feminine rather than how women lead, because we have a mix of feminine and masculine style. And you need the blend. This isn't about, pushing men off the pedestal. It's about finding the blend in the leadership team. But it's about that, allowing women at the top to help others come up.
Yeah, I think what Rachel said there is just, it's so key, is that so many of the women who have really achieved those high levels of corporate success have done it by modeling themselves on men. And I'm not saying all of them by any means, but in many cases, it's because they've adapted to the existing system. Whereas I think there needs to be a change in the values of corporate culture. So, as soon as we stop valuing people who are tired and exhausted and are working sort of, 5 hours extra every day because they want to achieve, most women won't put up with that. So, because they're trying to balance so many things. So I think that once corporate culture starts to value sort of a more balanced view of work and life, you'll start to see a lot more women rise naturally, because they value that balance, as opposed to, I will put everything aside in order to achieve my career goals. It's a more balanced view and a less toxic workplace.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree, Mel. Adela and Lucy, do you have anything to add at all?
Well, I would say I agree with the fact that I think it's so important to think about that we have to change the way that the whole system works. It's not about trying to become the men. It's about trying to be different. It's not about trying to fit into the same box that we think there isn't a box, that we made the box. So it's all about trying to show that you don't have to necessarily be like anyone. You have to just have the confidence, and we need to teach women and young women that they can have the confidence to do what they want to do, not fit the box that they think that people want them to do. If that makes sense.
I think a really nice thing with the pandemic coming in, like maybe one of the benefits is, in the field of psychology, we've been forced to look more at the sort of work-life balance and sort of explore how that affects different genders. And just building up on what Mel said earlier, because as women, there's so many other things that we are asked to focus on or asked to look at, that we don't have the capacity to put in those 6 extra hours, those 9 extra hours, and just keep working. And that obviously changes how we look at our career and how we look at what we're doing.
And I think that it feeds into the way that we view men as well. It's not good for them that so society's put them in this box that that's what they have to do. Men having a more holistic existence of, looking after kids and, being part of the home and cooking and cleaning and, making the holiday plans. where all of these things that have been the traditional sort of like female roles, we start to break all of those down, and it makes for a more enjoyable existence together, because we're all experiencing all of those things, as opposed to, I'm going to stick in my little box and work.
I was just thinking exactly the same thing, Mel. The other side of the scale is making it all right within society for men to be doing all those things and not have them called out on it, and, well, where's your wife? Why isn't she picking the kids up from school? All that kind of stuff. And even at the school gate, you know, I know a couple of men that are often there, and they say that, you know, they feel a little bit excluded. You know, who has that responsibility? I don't know, but it's right across the board, but definitely in the workplace, it's about making it all right for men. It's about choice, isn't it? You know, if it suits a couple to take the traditional roles, who's to say that's wrong? If they want to be able to have a more equitable balance in their relationship, then it should be all right on both sides for that.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
I think
So, sorry, go on, Lucy.
No, I was just going to say, I think the most key point that you said there was, it's all about choice. It's about being able to have the choice.
I mean, I remember when my children were tiny, and I was all for this sort of thing of not giving gender-related toys and things like that. And, you know, when my son was a toddler, I thought, well, you know, get him an ironing board or something like that and be really sort of on trend. And I thought, actually, that would be really cruel if I'd bought him an ironing board for his birthday. He loved cars, and he would have had absolutely no interest in, and you would never buy anybody a present that you know they're going to hate, would you? And least of all your own children. So it is about that choice, but it's making it all right for the boys that would enjoy an ironing board or a doll or whatever, and all right for the girls who want cars instead of the usual sort of girly kind of stuff. So it's all of that as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So just moving on to the next question. Young women and girls in Zimbabwe face a number of hardships, including inequality in education, period poverty, child marriage, and more. So a question for Rachel. Obviously, you sponsor a child and you allow her the opportunity to go to school and break down some of those barriers. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes, no, absolutely, Liv. It was interesting. So when I first met Dorothy, and probably about 5 years ago now, I can't quite remember, and she was talking to me about the girls' life in Zimbabwe if they don't go to school. Child marriage is often still very prevalent, and that would typically happen when the girl was about 13 years old. Apparently it will often happen to somebody who's significantly older than the girl as well, which probably makes it even more distasteful. But that whole thing of when a child is in school, that gets put on hold. So even if that still happens by the time the girl is 16 or 18, that's got to be a little bit better than happening when they're 13. But one would hope that by providing them with an education, you then open up a completely different path for them, particularly if they're able to go on to further education. And then, of course, what will often happen is that they will come back to their village as a qualified, whatever it is, whether it's a nurse, a teacher, or a doctor, or a car mechanic, or whatever it's going to be. They're then out there as an example for the other girls. And that really resonated with me, because one of the jobs that I had very early on in my career was working with juvenile offenders, and our project was all about keeping them out of the custodial system for exactly the same reasons, in a sense, as if you can hold off putting a young person into custody until they're about 17, most of them will then go on and live a completely lawful life. It's that thing of a loose end, typically boys, out for larks, they'll steal a car, they'll, steal from shops, all that kind of thing. So obviously there are always going to be young people that will do more serious stuff, but these are the kids that by the time they're 17, they've left school, they've got a job, they've got a girlfriend, and that's behind them. Whereas if they go into the custodial system, they are much more likely to stay an offender. And it's the same principle with these girls, that it's not just about keeping them away from that marriage, but of course, while they're being educated, you're opening up their eyes to so many things, so many opportunities, that life doesn't have to be like it was for their parents and grandparents. And, that's where we're so blessed in our country, that we don't have to even think about that. Education is there for us. To take or not to take. But that was kind of the thing that made me think, oh my goodness, it is such a difference that you make to somebody by giving them that education, or giving them the opportunity for that education.
And it's back to that sort of role model point again, because we've got one girl, Rebecca, who's a sort of a kind of like in the youth parliament kind of member in Zim, and then we've got another girl a young woman who's gone on to study pharmacy at the University of Zimbabwe. And those younger girls who are in school, I hope, would look up to those and think, wow, that's a possibility for me. Because I think you look at providing education as very basic level, getting taught math, science, etc., but it's actually, like you said, so much more than that. It's literally it's keeping them safe, and it's giving them that opportunity to have a much brighter future than they would if they weren't in education.
Yeah, and then it starts to break down those norms, doesn't it? Because if less and less girls are available for these child marriages, then those child marriages perhaps stop happening. And it just emanates all the time, doesn't it, of creating change and elevating the status of women in particular. I mean, it's the same for boys. I think it gives boys a great opportunity, but they're not so vulnerable in terms of the marriage and the outcome if they don't go get their education, that they're all in a more privileged position. But, the more children you can educate, then of course the better. Yeah,
definitely. And thank you so much for being a sponsor and such a strong advocate of the work we do. And Mel, you're currently taking part in our Well Giving Challenge, where the money raised will go towards a number of projects, such as our Period Poverty Project, which teaches communities how to make sustainable period products. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about Well Giving and why you signed up?
I signed up because it was so easy. I mean, doing a little bit of good every day is really, it's good for your soul. And this was such a simple thing to do. I mean, I'm going to go to boot camp anyway. If I just have to go online and just say, okay, I went to boot camp, and it helps. I think that also my perspective is slightly different because, being in South Africa, I was 13 years old in 1994 when we went through our massive change. So when we talk about, sort of education, the importance of education, poverty in Southern Africa, I see it. It's part of my everyday understanding of how exceptionally lucky we are. And the idea of raising £1,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money until you bring it back and you convert it into any local currency. And all of a sudden you realize how much that can have an impact. And, sort of, as Rachel said, education and keeping little humans in school is the thing that drives forward momentum and development. We've seen it in South Africa with the whole change from the Bantu education system into a more mainstream education, elevating that level that everybody, because all of a sudden it's not acceptable to have child marriage anymore. There's a cultural shift. There is a shift in the mindset of the majority of a community, and that then improves everybody. The one thing that I love about women is that women take everything back into their community. You teach a man a skill, or you give a man something, and very often he'll improve his own life, but he won't necessarily improve the lives of those around him. Whereas women spread things. So it will, she will learn something and take it back into her community. And I think that the well-giving, the whole idea of Dorothy's journey is an amazing one. And to spend a very small amount of money, I think it was £15, to just go and register. And then I feel fabulous because I look and go, oh my gosh, look at how far, you know, sort of check how far I've seen to. So there is some gratitude that it creates within myself for the awareness of what I'm doing for my own health. And then to be able to give back in such a small way, from, you know, sort of sending money there and it comes back and it feeds into, you know, into Southern Africa, is amazing for me. It's just, I wish that more people would give that small amount of time just to be able to. I don't think they realize the impact that small amounts of money can have when you convert it into a different currency. So even those little amounts all add up.
I know Lucy, Adela and I are refreshing it on the daily. I think we're still in Congo at the moment, but yeah, we're well on our way. So thank you so much for helping us with that progress.
I looked this morning, I'm number 3 on the leaderboard.
Lucy, do you want to ask the last question?
Of course, I would love to. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about both of your businesses and any advice you would give to the next generation of young women on who might perhaps want to start their own.
You go, Rachel.
Hey, yeah, so my business is all around presentation skills, and in particular, I help people tell their stories. So I've done some work with Dorothy, and that's been absolutely fascinating because her story is absolutely amazing. And I do that in a number of different ways. So I do one-to-one coaching, I offer training in organizations and so on. But I think it's one of those things, if you told me when I was in my 20s or 30s that that's what I would be doing, I don't think I would have known how. I mean, I do remember, I mentioned a job working with young offenders, and we were quite innovative with that project, and we offered a training course for other local authorities. And I remember absolutely loving organising this training course, the whole thing about ordering the lunches, advertising it, all of that. And I thought, wow, I wish there was something, I would love to do this as a job. But I have no idea where to go. Didn't even have the internet in those days to Google how to set up your own business. I don't think it had even occurred to me. So I would say always look at the possibilities and go and talk to people. But also, again, it comes down to what I was saying earlier about self-belief, of knowing that you have that option. And there's nothing wrong with constantly changing. I mean, even since I've been working for myself, I've evolved and changed what I'm doing, who I'm doing it for. I'm pretty confident now it won't change a massive amount going forward now, but there's no such thing as failure, I think, is what I would want to say. You're just finding out what didn't quite work for you. Now, I know it's very different if you're young and you have a mortgage or rent to pay and all of that kind of thing. There's more at stake, and that will have been part of the reason that I didn't sort of take a leap of faith, because by that time I had a mortgage. But I would just say, never say no. Just look into how you could make it work. Most, when you're it's often possible to start a business on the side of a paid job and gradually sort of shift the balance to a point where you think, actually, now it's the time to make the leap and work full time in my business. So to consider that, but don't think you've got to have found the thing that you're going to do. Just start where your heart takes you and see what evolves, and just recognise that it is a journey.
That's some really lovely advice. Thank you, Rachel. And how about you, Mel?
So I own a digital marketing agency. We've got an office here in Durban, South Africa, and we've also got an office in the UK. So we help clients with Google problems and social media problems, and helping them to get in front of the people that they want to connect with online. And I refer to myself as the accidental entrepreneur, because a lot of my life has kind of been it's normally my husband. We've worked together for 20 plus years. It's normally him saying, should we do this? And me going, okay, sounds like fun. I'm a pretty chilled out kind of let's go with the flow type person. So when I finished my honors degree in animal, plant and environmental science, of all things, he had a restaurant and he said, well, do you want to come work in the restaurant with me for a while? I said, okay. So then we landed up owning restaurants for a while. And then when my daughter came along, I said, we both had decided that the hospitality industry is not a great one to raise kids in. Let's do something else. What should we do? So we Googled, and this is how we came into this. So it's been more of a journey of what do we want life to look like and going in that direction. And my advice for any sort of young woman thinking about starting her own business is the one thing that you need to be, okay, and this is not a thing like you might need to be, you have to be every single day, is resilient. So if you are not willing to get things wrong and then turn around and say, okay, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? What can we learn and what can we change? Don't even attempt it. Go and work for somebody else, because you are going to get things epically wrong. You are going to fail badly, publicly. It's going to take a little bit of chutzpah to get through. So have it in your mind that you're ready for the failure, and that when it comes, you're going to pick it, unpick it, and figure out what did we get right? What did we get wrong? Why? What framework do we put in place for not doing that again in the future? And trust your gut, because very often those failures happen because you chose to work with the wrong people. It doesn't matter how big a business gets, it still happens between people. And having that understanding of, you know what, this isn't a good fit will really help you to be able to employ better and choose your clients better. And at the end of the day, will make your life so much easier. And I'm like a really lazy person at heart. So if it can be easier, I'm all for it.
I think from both of you, it's been really refreshing to kind of hear of that almost like a non-linear career path, in that I think I grew up thinking that you sort of go to school, go to university, and then you do one career for the rest of your life, because that's what my parents have both done the same career for 30, 40 years. So I think it's really nice that that kind of attitude of embracing failure, trying things that you love, seeing what you like and don't like, and just kind of seeing where you fit in the world a little bit. And if that comes with making mistakes and trying things that maybe you didn't enjoy as much or weren't as good at, then so be it. So thank you. That's really great advice from both of you.
My daughter is 13, and there is a very good chance that she might live to 100. I cannot imagine anything more stultifying than being stuck doing the same thing for, possibly 50, 60 years of your life. It's the world of work has changed, and it's to go out there and try different things and sort of reinvent yourself. It's far healthier. Sort of what happens is that people retire and their brains shut down because that spark isn't there anymore. So keep working, keep trying, keep perfecting. If you don't like what's happening now, figure out what can you do to change it. Certainly don't jump from job to job. That is a very, very bad thing. I'm not advising that. But if you don't like your life, you have the ability to be able to change it. Just you have to figure it out and do it with intention. Don't do it, be the accidental entrepreneur. Do it with the intention of what are you trying to build.
And I think that's a good point that you make, Mel, about retiring and so on, because when you are self-employed, you are in control of that. You get to choose whether you work 3 days a week, 7 days a week, 2 days a week. You can gradually phase it out. You can say no to a certain number of clients. You can sell your business. All of those options are there. Whereas if you are still in the workplace, whilst some workplaces might offer that sort of thing, it's a little bit more rigid. And I think that, I can't imagine ever fully retiring, because, being in the world of business and new ideas is what keeps me sort of going. But equally, I don't want to be working 5 days a week. I want to be able to, have more time for myself and my family and friends and so on. So I think working for yourself in theory gives you more flexibility, and then it's down to the choice. As you were saying, you can absolutely choose to make sure it does give you that flexibility and set the business up accordingly.
I feel like this has been I feel really energized after this conversation. I think these are the sort of like conversations that we need to have like more often. But huge thank yous to both of you so much for your time, and it's been really lovely to hear about your stories and your challenges and successes and all of that sort of thing.
This has been a really great way to commemorate International Women's Day. It's been so lovely to hear from all of you and all of the inspirational words that you have to say. I have so much to reflect on, and it shows that there still is a lot of progress that needs to be made, but it's incredible that women like you are paving the way for the next generation of women. Thank you so much for your time and for your amazing and inspirational words.